Hi everyone, and welcome back. Today's lecture is going to be the last in our series for this semester. We've just finished up with the Civil War and we're going to step off into Reconstruction with today's lecture. But before I get started on that, I wanted to go over the prompt that I left you in your notes about sectional differences and how it affected American politics in the time period prior to 1858. One big thing about when you're given a prompt, always make sure you know your date. So we're looking at before 1858, so we're not going to look at anything that was in the Civil War. So you're looking at sectional differences, and you need to understand what those are. Differences, everybody knows it's this is different than this. But when you're looking at sections, sometimes you wonder, well, what section are they talking about? In this case, we're talking about sections of the country. So you have the North and the South, which is the two big sections. Yes, the West is involved in this, but at this time we were looking more at the differences between the North and the South. And when you start looking at the differences between the two big ones that jump out at you are going to be the economic differences of the North and the South and the labor systems of the North and the South. But you also have got the population difference. You've got an educational difference. And they two kind of go together because you have a lot more population in the North than you have got a higher education level, a higher skill level, because these people are having to compete for wage labor jobs. In the South, you have less population and you have a white population that is having to compete against a free labor force. And so they're finding it very difficult to make it up the economic ladder. And so you've got these differences, and now you want to look at what kind of political things are going on because of these differences. So, yeah, you've got the Missouri Compromise, you've got the Compromise of 1833 that goes along with the Tariff of Abominations, you have got ones that are kind of easy to see, but you've also got the ones with like education and with population that are a little more cloudy, a little more gray area in there. So you have to kind of look at what goes along with the two. You got a group in the South that there's not as many of them, and they're not as well educated. And people that are less educated have a tendency to make themselves feel better when they feel intimidated by looking down their nose at people they think are less than them. So they're going to say, well, at least I'm not a slave. So they're going to be looking for places where they can improve their economic standing. So going west, where there's a possibility of cheap, if not free land. So that's going to be a big pull for them. Looking at different ways to improve their economy. And so when you're looking at political things, look along those lines, where the things that are going to pull them west. And that's where you're going to find that political connection for those. So as you're looking at it and you're listing on one side the sectional differences and then on the other side the political aspects, make sure that you don't just list them. Make sure that you're able to define what they are in your own words. That will help you remember them. It'll give you a better grasp of what the issues were, and maybe give you a better understanding overall of the differences that's driving this relentless trek towards the Civil War. Now, let's talk about Reconstruction. I want to share this screen with you here and see if I can't pull myself out of the picture for you. There were three different major plans for Reconstruction. Abraham Lincoln had started on his a couple of years into the war, trying to figure out how to put the country back together. He was a little more lenient because he was trying to bridge a gap, and he did not want to alienate the people he was trying to bring back in. So he's going to offer a pardon to all supporters of the Confederacy if they swear allegiance back to the U.S. and abolish slavery. Once 10% of the population had done that, of the voting population, then that state could reapply for admittance back into the Union. He did not offer any kind of protection for freed African Americans. He will encourage them to become educated so that when the time came they could get the right to vote. But he was not going to jump on the right to vote right off the bat because he felt like they had been in bondage for so long they needed a chance to catch up and become educated. And so that's Lincoln's 10% plan. Now, Johnson's plan, it says on this slide that he was harsh on the Southerners. The only Southerners that he was really harsh on were the plantation owners. Remember, he is basically from the South, and he is a poor farm boy from the South. And so he is going to go after those that planter aristocracy, but pretty much let his buddies off the hook. So he's going to grant amnesty to all the whites who are going to swear loyalty back to the United States. He is going to have each state abolish slavery. And then he's going to go after the rich guys by making them pay for the war debts for the southern states. But because of his attitudes about blacks, he is not going to offer any kind of role for blacks in as far as citizenship or voting rights or anything along those lines. And he is going to establish his Reconstruction plan almost as soon as he takes office. He will be sworn in the day after, or the day that Lincoln dies. And at this time, Congress is on recess. They're not in Washington. And so he is going to implement his Reconstruction plan. And when Congress comes back to meet up again, he's going to say, oh, we don't need to worry about Reconstruction. I got that all handled. Let's move on to other things. Well, as these Northerners come in and start taking their seats in Congress, they're going to look over at the seats next to them and see these former Confederates taking their seats as well. And they're going to go, this is not going to happen. You guys are not going to wage 4 years of bloodshed and then come back and expect to pick up right where you left off. And so this is where the radical Republicans are going to step in and pretty much take over Reconstruction. It's the radical Republicans that are behind the Reconstruction Acts that are going to make sure that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are passed. They're the ones that are going to implement military reconstruction in the South to make sure that the rights that have now been given to these former slaves are being allowed to them. And so your radical Republicans are going to be led by these two guys right over here. Thaddeus Stevens was the leader of them in the House, and then Charles Sumner is going to be the leader of the radical Republicans in the Senate. And yes, this is the same one that had been beaten on the Senate floor by Bully Brooks. He has now recovered, and he is back into Congress and helping out there. Now, the Reconstruction Amendments were very, very, very important. Here they are, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Now, the 13th Amendment is passed in 1865, right before Lincoln is assassinated. That's the one, if you've seen the movie Lincoln, this is the one that is in that movie. And this is also, Thaddeus Stevens is the one that plays the person in that role that keeps prodding Lincoln on to getting this passed. The 14th Amendment is going to grant citizenship to all former slaves, and the 15th Amendment in 1869 is going to grant black males the right to vote. Okay. Now, these three amendments show up on all kinds of different standardized tests, and sometimes it's very difficult to remember which amendment goes with which right. And so I'm going to teach you this little sing-song thing, and you're going to think, oh, thanks a lot, Dr. Garrett. I really wish you hadn't done that. But it goes to the tune of Three Blind Mice. So it's free citizens vote, free citizens vote, 13, 14, 15, free citizens vote. And it will help you remember what amendment goes with what right. For the three civil rights amendments. Now, a lot of people will say, well, why did we really need these anyway? And this is, I learned this not too long ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Emancipation does not equal abolition, and freedom does not equal citizenship. Because you can emancipate somebody, you can free somebody, but if the action, this like slavery, if it hasn't been outlawed, there's nothing that says that somebody else can't re-enslave that same person. And so it was necessary to have an amendment that totally outlawed slavery across the country. Now, does that mean that we don't have slavery in this country anymore? We don't have it legally, but it still happens. We call it human trafficking, but it's still out there, unfortunately. Now, the next one is freedom does not equal citizenship. That's why we needed the 14th Amendment. Let's talk about the Native Americans. They have been free on this continent for as long before the white man ever came over from Europe. But they didn't get U.S. citizenship until the 1920s. And so it was important for the 14th Amendment to be in there, so these freed slaves now have citizenship rights. And then it's nice to have these two things, but if you don't have the right to vote, then your voice is not being heard. So that's why the 15th Amendment was necessary as well. Now, the 15th Amendment is going to aggravate the women, not because the black men got the right to vote, but because the women did not. And so it's going to be several more decades before the women get in there as well. Now, the military districts that were in the South, and this map shows you as each state was readmitted, but I can also show you that where the five military districts are. You got the one that's Texas, Louisiana. I think there's one here, Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee. Then it's over this direction and then up. So there's 5 military districts, and the U.S. military was sent to the South so that they could protect the freed slaves and that they could exercise their new won freedoms and rights. And they're going to go about doing this. You have got blacks now that are going to be able to legally be married. Education is going to be a huge thing for them. They're going to go about trying to find their families. I remember with slavery, children could be sold away from their mother. Men could be separated from their wives. And so they're going to go about trying to find their family and bring them back together. Religion. Religion was a big thing even when they were in slavery, but even more so as they're trying to establish their footing and get themselves up, and stable. The Freedmen's Bureau is going to play a big role in this. The Freedmen's Bureau was an agency created by the federal government in 1865 so that not only freed blacks but also white refugees could find clothing and medical care and food and education. The South is absolutely annihilated during this war. Not only is their economic system torn up with their plantations and what few industries they have, but their infrastructure is also destroyed. What few train tracks they had, Sherman took those rails and heated them up and bent them around trees and called them Sherman's bow ties so that they couldn't relay those tracks. The scorched earth policy is going to really tear up the South. And so they need help in getting up on their feet. And let me give you a description. Think about graduation. And you graduated from high school. You have gone to your all-night party. You've come home and you have found on the front porch all your belongings. The doors are locked and the locks have been changed. And everybody you know is in the same boat you're in. Do you know where you're going to go? Do you know where you're going to put your head that night? Where your next meal's coming from? Because that's where all these now freed slaves, that's the position they're all in. And so the Freedmen's Bureau is going to help them get started and get their lives put back together. Group, there's going to be lots of blacks now that are going to run for office because now they have the right to vote. And so this guy right here in the middle, Hiram Revels, he and Blanche K. Bruce are going to be the first African-American senators. They're both from Mississippi. And there's going to be blacks all over the South that are going to be elected to public office during this time of Reconstruction. You're also going to have schools that are going to be put together. Education is going to be so important. Today we have a tendency to take education for granted. because we've always had it. But when you've been denied it and you know that education is freedom and education is power, that, it's something you desperately crave. And so they're going to put together schools all over the South to educate their children, teaching them how to read and write. Most of your school teachers are going to be a little better educated than their students that they are working with, but it's not like it is today where you have to have a college degree and pass state tests. Back in this time period, if a teacher had a high school education, then he or she was capable of teaching younger children. And so a lot of your early schools are going to be set up in that fashion. But there's also going to be black codes. And black codes were a way for the Solid South to reassert itself. They're going to be a system, a series of laws that are just designed to keep blacks in their place, subservient and dependent, and in a way always working for the same people that they had been slaves to previously. You're also going to have carpetbaggers and scalawags that are going to be all over the South. The way to keep these two separate, a carpetbag was a suitcase. So this right here is a carpetbag. And if you have a suitcase, that means you've had to travel somewhere. So your carpetbaggers are from the North. And they're going to come down and take advantage of the South for power and profit. Think about here a few years ago when Hurricane Harvey devastated Houston, and houses were flooded, and when the waters receded, there was a lot of repair and things that needed to be done. There's going to be sleazy contractors that are going to come in, and they're going to tell people, oh yeah, we'll fix your house up, just pay us $1,500 up front so we can get the supplies, and we'll get started on that next week. And they'd never see them again. And so you can kind of compare, carpetbaggers did a lot of the same thing. Oh yeah, we'll take care of you, and then just embezzle the money. Scalawags were Southerners who are going to infiltrate politics and try to profit off the land and gain political influence in the South and take advantage of their neighbors. And so these were two groups in the South that are going to keep the South back and keep the South irritated about having lost the war. Now, your freed blacks are going to have a challenge trying to find work. So a lot of them are going to continue to do the jobs that they've always done before. So a lot of your men are going to be sharecroppers. Now, sharecroppers were not all black. My grandfather was a sharecropper. They're also known as tenant farmers. And what would happen with your plantation owners who had this free labor force are now looking for ways to plant their crop without having to pay a bunch of money out, because they don't have the capital at this point to be able to pay wages. And so what they're going to do is they're going to rent out parts of their land and to sharecroppers, and they're going to allow these sharecroppers to farm their own land as well as the plantation land. And in return, when the sharecropper got the profit off of their crops, they'd pay the rent. But the landowner always kept the rent just a little bit higher than what the sharecroppers could pay. And so it always kept them in a place of always owing, always being dependent on the landowner. Now, the women also will take on jobs similar to the kinds of jobs they'd had before. So you have got women that are going to be nursemaids, they're going to be domestics, they're going to be washerwomen, and so your freed slaves are going for a while go back to doing a lot of the jobs that they had been doing while they had been slaves as well. Now, as we get more into the Johnson administration, the radical Republicans are getting really, really aggravated that President Johnson keeps blocking Reconstruction. He keeps trying to prevent his friends from being punished. And so Congress is going to pass something called the Tenure of Office Act. And it's going to say that the president cannot fire anybody out of his cabinet or administration without the consent of Congress. Well, Andrew Johnson thinks that this is unconstitutional, and so he's going to turn around and fire cabinet member Secretary Edwin Stanton, who was Secretary of War. And at that point, Congress is going to move to impeach. It's going to pass the House, and he's going to miss being impeached by the Senate by one vote. Now, it wasn't because this particular senator thought that Andrew Johnson was all that in a bag of chips. It was because he was afraid that by impeaching the president, that it would mar the image of president, and so that's why he will vote against it. But even though Andrew Johnson does not get impeached, he does lose his influence as president, and it will remain that way until he leaves office in the next election. Now, you also have got the rise of hate groups. The most well-known, of course, is the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. Its official name is the Invisible Empire of the South. It's created in 1866 as an anti-black group. The original formers of this group had no intention of it being violent, and once it does become violent, they're going to leave the organization. But the KKK is going to wreak havoc across the South against these former slaves. And they're going to hide their faces because that way they can get, it wasn't me. You couldn't tell it was me. And it's going to make life for the former slaves, as it shows in this cartoon, worse than it was when they were slaves. You have a family, a former slave family here cowering down. You can see, if you look close enough, you can see a schoolhouse burning over here, a lynching over here. The KKK is shaking hands with the Union League or the White League, and it says worse than the Union as it was, is what it says here. And it's not until the Grant administration that Congress will pass the Force Acts of 1870, 1871 that's going to make the KKK go underground for a while. The KKK really has never gone away. It will rear its ugly head, and then it'll be forced out of sight, and then it'll come back and it'll be forced out of sight. After this particular time period, it'll disappear for a while, but it'll come back in the 1920s and start being obnoxious once again. And so you got the KKK, and not too long after this, you're going to have the black codes that are going to turn into Jim Crow laws that are going to also keep the former slaves from enjoying the rights and privileges of being an American citizen. And then you're going to have the end of Reconstruction. You have this election in 1876 between Rutherford B. Hayes and Sam Tilden, and it's going to wind up as a tie. And as we know, when a presidential election ends in a tie, it goes to the House of Representatives to settle the tie. And Hayes is going to tell Congress, well, if you'll make me president, I'll end Reconstruction. Because at this time, Northern Republicans were getting really weary of this war. They didn't like the expense of Reconstruction. They did not like having to deal with trying to reconstruct an area where they were being treated so hostile by the residents. So it was costing time, it was costing money, and they didn't like having their military boys so far away from home. And so the idea that Hayes would end Reconstruction was very, very appealing. And so they are going to select Hayes as president, and within just a very short time, he is going to pull all the military out of the South and end Reconstruction. It is not going to take very long at all for the solid South to reform, where the white power base is resettled, and it'll be just like it was before the Civil War, but instead of calling it slavery, now we're going to call it sharecropping. And it's going to stay that way for the next almost 100 years. But that's going to be the end of Reconstruction at that time. It is rather sad that we went to all that trouble for it to end up almost in the same place it was before. The South is going to be like I said, it's going to be annihilated. The North's economy, though, is going to do okay. This sounds rather weird, but war is good for the economy. It creates jobs in an industrial environment, not so much in an agrarian environment, but in an industrial environment, you have to have workers to be able to create the things that a military needs. And so it's going to create jobs. And when people have money in their pocket, they spend it. And money is the oil that greases the economy. So in the North, the economy is going to improve. In the South, the economy is going to be devastated. So the last thing that's in your notes is another prompt that says, to what extent did the Civil War and Reconstruction change American economics, politics, and society? And so when you're looking at economics, look at how the economy, the economic destruction of the South or the economic improvement of the North. Look at the change in the labor systems. Okay. In politics, you have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, but you've also got things like the black codes and the Jim Crow laws. So that's all in the political sphere. And then society. Just because the laws have come down and said that you have to treat other people this way, you cannot legislate the way people feel. You can pass laws that make us keep our hands to ourselves, make us tolerate one another, but you can't make us like it. And so society is going to deal with that. And of course, the most obvious one is the KKK, but you've also got religious differences that are going to go along. You now have a resentment that's going to be built because now you have people that are moving into your area that are now competing for your job. And that's not just going to be in the South. That's going to be up in the North as well. And so you have to look at the societal differences that are going to be brought about by the Civil War. Are women going to be looked at differently because of the Civil War? I mean, it's easy to talk about the different races looking at each other differently, but are we going to look at each other gender-wise? Because women are going to play a huge part in this war, and take on roles that they had never been allowed to have before. So when you're looking at how the Civil War and Reconstruction changes all that, look at all those aspects. So look at how it changes things money-wise. Look how it changes things legally, and look how it changes things how people treat each other. And that brings us to the end of our study for this semester. I hope that you have enjoyed learning about U.S. history all the way from Columbus to the end of the Civil War, and that you have learned quite a bit from what we've gotten to discuss. And I'm going to leave it at that point. Thank you. Bye.